The moment she whispered those words, the entire room seemed to disappear around me. My age isn't a problem, right? Her voice was barely audible beneath the music and laughter, but something in it made my heart stop. I looked at the young woman standing beside me beneath the bright afternoon lights of the garden reception, wearing a simple blue dress and holding her nervous hands together. I had hired her to accompany me to one party, nothing more. She was supposed to smile, make conversation, and help me survive an afternoon, surrounded by people who believed they knew everything about my life. But I never expected that one quiet question would force me to confront a truth I had spent years avoiding. Before we continue, if you believe in hidden truth stories, please like this video, share it with someone who loves emotional stories, leave a comment, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to you. And now, let me take you back to the beginning, because that afternoon was not supposed to change my life. My name is Everett Callahan, and at 42, I had become very good at pretending that everything was under control. I owned a successful architectural firm, lived in a beautiful house overlooking the city, and attended the kind of events where people wore expensive clothes and laughed at jokes they did not find funny. From the outside, my life looked complete. But there was one thing I could never explain to anyone. I hated parties. Not because I disliked people, but because every gathering reminded me of the person I had become. After my divorce, my friends constantly tried to introduce me to someone new. My mother, before she passed away, had always worried that I would grow old alone. Even now, her words sometimes returned to me when the house became too quiet. The party that changed everything was being hosted by my business partner, Aldrich Monroe, to celebrate the opening of our newest design project. I had no excuse to avoid it. Everyone important in our professional circle would be there. I needed a companion because Aldrich had spent months teasing me about arriving alone, and I was tired of pretending his jokes did not bother me. So, through a professional event service, I arranged for someone to accompany me. That was how I met Mireille Laurent. When Mireille arrived at my office that morning, I expected someone polished and confident, someone who knew exactly how to move through wealthy social circles. Instead, she stood outside my office door wearing a modest blue dress, carrying a small handbag, and looking slightly nervous. She was 27, intelligent, observant, and surprisingly quiet. She explained that she had experience, working at formal events, and understood the boundaries of the arrangement. She was not there to pretend to be my wife or create a false romance. She was simply there to be company, conversation, and a familiar face in an uncomfortable room. Something about her honesty immediately made me comfortable. During the drive to the party, she asked me why I hated social events. I laughed and told her that people always ask questions they did not actually want answered. She smiled and said that perhaps I simply needed better people around me. It was such a simple statement, but I found myself thinking about it long after we arrived. The reception was held in a huge garden filled with white chairs, colorful flowers, and long tables covered with food. The afternoon sunlight fell gently across the lawn, and children ran between the adults while musicians played near the fountain. It was beautiful, but I felt trapped within minutes. Aldrich greeted us loudly and immediately introduced Mireille to several guests. She handled every conversation with remarkable grace. She never tried to impress anyone. She listened. She noticed when someone felt uncomfortable and quietly included them. Within an hour, I realized that people were not drawn to her because she was beautiful, although she certainly was. They were drawn to her because she made them feel seen. Then my former colleague, Vincent Hale, approached us. He looked at Mireille, then at me, and raised an eyebrow. He asked how I had met her, and before I could answer, he made a careless joke about my midlife crisis. Several people laughed. I smiled politely, but Mireille noticed my expression. She stepped closer and quietly told me that I did not have to explain myself to anyone. That was when I understood something. She was not simply accompanying me. She was protecting me from the room. Later, we walked toward the quieter side of the garden. The music became distant, and for the first time that afternoon, we were alone. Mireille looked toward the guests and then back at me. Her expression suddenly changed. The confidence she had carried all afternoon disappeared, replaced by uncertainty. She took a breath and whispered, "My age isn't a problem, right?" I was stunned. I asked her why she thought it would be. She hesitated before telling me that she had grown used to people judging her. Some thought she was too young to understand life. Others assumed that because she worked at formal events, they knew what kind of person she was. She told me that she had spent years caring for her younger brother after their father left, and that she had learned early that people often judged circumstances without knowing the story behind them. Then she revealed something that changed the way I saw her. She had not taken the event job because she wanted expensive clothes or easy money. Her younger brother, Thomas, had recently been accepted into a technical college, but their family could not afford the tuition. Mireya had been working several jobs to help him. She had taken this assignment because it paid well enough to cover part of his first semester. I looked at her and suddenly felt ashamed of the assumptions I had made. She noticed my silence and smiled faintly, telling me she did not expect sympathy. She only wanted me to know that she was trying to build something better for her family. I told her that I understood more than she realized. My father had once lost everything, and I remembered how hard my mother had worked to keep our family together. That memory had shaped me, but somehow I had buried it beneath years of success. For the rest of the afternoon, we talked less about ourselves and more about ordinary things. She told me about her brother's love for machines. I told her about the first building I had ever designed. We laughed when a waiter accidentally dropped an entire tray of desserts. We watched the sunlight move across the garden as the party slowly came to an end. But just as we were preparing to leave, I heard my business partner speaking with another guest. They were discussing Mireya. One of them had apparently discovered that she worked for an event agency and immediately assumed she had been hired for reasons that had nothing to do with companionship. The words were cruel, careless, and humiliating. I wanted to confront them. Mireya stopped me. She simply shook her head and said that people who had already decided who she was would never listen to the truth. Then she walked away toward the garden gate. I followed her. Outside, the afternoon had become quieter. The city traffic sounded far away, and the sky was beginning to turn pale as the sun lowered. I told her she should never allow strangers to make her ashamed of honest work. She looked at me and said something I would remember for the rest of my life. She said that sometimes the hardest part of being poor was not lacking money. It was watching people assume that your dignity disappeared along with it. Those words stayed with me. The next morning, I contacted the college Thomas had been accepted into. I asked about scholarships and assistance programs, but I did not give them Mireya's name. I wanted the help to be available without making her feel indebted to me. Eventually, I discovered that the college had a small community scholarship fund. I donated enough to cover Thomas's first year anonymously. Months passed. Mireya and I remained friends. Nothing dramatic happened. There was no sudden romance, no unbelievable transformation. Instead, there were small conversations, occasional coffee meetings, and messages about ordinary things. She continued working. Tomas began college. My own life became quieter and somehow happier. One evening, Mireya called me. Her voice was shaking. She told me Thomas had received an internship with an engineering company. It was the opportunity he had dreamed about. She was crying as she thanked me for believing in him. I finally told her the truth about the scholarship. There was silence on the other end of the phone. Then she began to cry even harder. She said she had spent most of her life believing that kindness always came with a price. She had learned to question every generous gesture because she was afraid someone would eventually ask for something in return. But I had helped her without asking for anything. I told her that was the point. Years later, when I think about that afternoon, I no longer remember the expensive decorations, the music, or the wealthy guests. I remember a young woman standing beside a garden fountain, afraid that her age, her job, and her circumstances made her less worthy of respect. I remember the question she whispered. My age isn't a problem, right? The truth was that her age had never been the problem. The problem was a world that had taught her to apologize for simply trying to survive. Mireya eventually opened a small design studio with her brother. Thomas became an engineer, just as he had dreamed. I continued running my company, but I changed the way I treated people. I started a scholarship program for young adults whose families were struggling. I began to understand that sometimes the most meaningful thing we can give another person is not money, opportunity, or advice. Sometimes it is simply the dignity of being seen. And Mireya taught me something I had forgotten. A person's worth is never measured by their age, their clothes, their profession, or the room they happen to stand in. It is measured by the kindness they carry when nobody is watching. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness. Your support means more than you know. And before we reach the final line, I have one special request. Comment, "Kindness sees the heart." If you believe that we should judge people by their character, not by their circumstances. Because sometimes, the person we almost overlook is the person who quietly changes our entire life. And sometimes, one whispered question is enough to reveal a truth that was waiting to be heard.